The morning mist clung to the ancient trees like ghostly fingers, weaving through branches that had stood sentinel for centuries. Deep within the Valdres forest, where even the most seasoned hunters feared to tread, young Marcus Kellaway guided his flock through paths that existed only in his memory. At 17, he possessed an unusual gift that had both blessed and cursed his family line for generations: the ability to sense the hidden currents of life that flowed beneath the surface of the natural world. The sheep followed him without question, their bells creating a gentle symphony that seemed to harmonize with the whispered songs of the wind. Marcus had been tending flocks in these woods since he was old enough to walk, despite the warnings of the village elders who spoke in hushed tones about the dark powers that dwelled in the heart of Aldris. They told stories of travelers who ventured too deep and returned speaking of impossible visions, of trees that moved without wind, and of a presence so ancient and powerful that it predated human civilization by millennia. Marcus had never paid much attention to these tales. To him, the forest was home, a place where his unusual sensitivity to life energy felt natural rather than abnormal. While other children in Millbrook Village struggled with the standard neural interface implants that connected them to the galactic network, Marcus found solace in the organic connections that pulsed through root systems and mycorrhizal networks. His parents, simple farmers on the outer rim world of Thesha Prime, had long ago accepted that their son was different, though they couldn't have imagined how different. The galaxy had moved far beyond the primitive days when humans first left Earth. Now, sprawling confederations of alien species governed vast sectors of space, their technologies so advanced that they seemed like magic to the simple colonists of frontier worlds. Thesha Prime was one such world, a backwater planet where humans scratched out modest livings through agriculture and animal husbandry, largely ignored by the great powers that shaped galactic civilization. As Marcus crested a small hill, he noticed something that made him pause. The usual morning chorus of forest birds had fallen silent, and the air itself seemed to thicken with an electric tension that made his skin prickle. His flock sensed it too, clustering closer to him with nervous bleating. He reached out with his enhanced senses, trying to identify the source of the disturbance, but found only an overwhelming presence that seemed to emanate from the very heart of the forest itself. That was when he saw her. She stood in a clearing perhaps 50 meters ahead, and Marcus's breath caught in his throat. At first glance, she appeared human, tall and graceful, with skin that seemed to glow with its own inner light. Her hair fell in waves of deep green that shifted to gold at the tips, moving as if stirred by some unfelt breeze. But it was her eyes that truly marked her as something beyond human understanding. They were the color of deep forest pools, ancient and knowing, holding depths that spoke of eons rather than mere decades. She wore what appeared to be a dress woven from living vines and flowers, the fabric shifting and changing as Marcus watched, new blooms appearing and fading in endless cycles. Around her feet, the grass grew taller and more vibrant, while wildflowers spontaneously burst into existence wherever her bare feet touched the earth. Marcus found himself frozen, caught between the urge to flee and an inexplicable desire to approach. His rational mind insisted that he was witnessing something impossible, perhaps a hallucination brought on by exposure to some unknown spore or chemical in the deep woods. But his deeper senses, the ones that had always guided him through the forest's hidden pathways, told him that he was in the presence of something genuinely divine. The woman, if woman was the right term, noticed him watching and turned to face him fully. When their eyes met, Marcus felt as though he was falling into an infinite well of starlight and shadow. For a moment that stretched into eternity, he experienced visions that his mind could barely process. Vast cities of crystal growing from mountaintops, oceans of liquid light where beings of pure energy danced among the waves, and forests that spanned entire continents, their canopies so dense that permanent twilight reigned beneath them. "You see me truly," Young shepherd, she spoke, though Marcus wasn't entirely certain whether he heard her voice with his ears or directly in his mind. Her words carried the rustling of leaves and the distant sound of running water. Few of your kind possess such clarity of perception. Marcus tried to speak, but found his voice caught in his throat. The sheep behind him had gone completely silent, standing as still as statues. Even the wind had died away, leaving the forest in an almost supernatural quiet. Do not fear, the entity continued, taking a step closer. Where her foot touched the ground, a small spring bubbled up from nowhere, forming a crystal-clear pool that reflected not the sky above, but some other realm entirely. I am Sylvana, guardian of this forest and all the life it contains. I have watched your people for many generations, but you are the first to walk these paths with such understanding. I don't understand, Marcus finally managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. What are you? Are you some kind of alien? Sylvana smiled, and the expression transformed her features in ways that seemed to shift through multiple dimensions simultaneously. I'm far older than such distinctions, child. Before your species looked to the stars, before the first of the elder races developed space travel, I was already ancient. I am what your people might call a nature spirit, though such terms barely scratch the surface of what I truly am. She gestured to the forest around them, and Marcus could suddenly perceive the intricate web of connections that linked every living thing, from the smallest microorganism to the mightiest tree. It was a network of staggering complexity, with Sylvana at its center like a conductor directing an enormous symphony of life. This world was seeded long ago by beings whose names are forgotten even by those who consider themselves the oldest races in the galaxy, she explained. They planted the seeds not just of plant and animal life, but of consciousness itself. Guardians like myself who would nurture and protect the developing ecosystems until they could sustain themselves. Marcus felt his worldview reshaping itself around this revelation. But if you're so powerful, why haven't you revealed yourself to the galactic authorities? Surely they would be interested in studying me, cataloging my abilities, perhaps finding ways to replicate or exploit them. Sylvana's expression grew sad, and around her, several flowers wilted and fell. I have observed the behavior of the spacefaring races, young Marcus. They are not evil, precisely, but they view the universe primarily as a collection of resources to be utilized. They would not understand what I am or why my existence is necessary. As if to emphasize her point, a distant rumble echoed through the forest, the sound of heavy machinery moving through the woods. Marcus recognized it immediately as the cutting equipment used by the logging crews that had been working their way deeper into Valderus over the past few months. The Galactic Timber Consortium had purchased harvesting rights to large sections of the outer forest, claiming they needed rare hardwoods for construction projects in the core worlds. Sylvana's entire demeanor changed at the sound. The gentle glow that surrounded her intensified, and the very air seemed to crackle with barely contained energy. They come closer each day, she said, her voice carrying a note of profound sorrow. They see only bored feet and profit margins where millennia of careful cultivation have created something irreplaceable. Can't you stop them? Marcus asked, though even as he spoke, he realized how naive the question sounded. I could, Sylvana replied, her eyes flashing with something that might have been anger. But to reveal myself openly would invite exactly the sort of attention I have spent centuries avoiding. The consortium would retreat temporarily, only to return with xenobiologists and corporate security forces. Eventually, they would find ways to contain or neutralize me, and the forest would be lost regardless. The machinery sounds grew closer, accompanied now by the distinctive whine of plasma cutters slicing through ancient wood. Marcus felt a deep ache in his chest as he imagined the irreplaceable ecosystem being reduced to lumber and profit reports. There has to be another way, he said, surprised by the conviction in his own voice. Humans aren't all like the corporation. Some of us understand what this place really is. Sylvana studied him intently, and Marcus felt as though she was looking not just at his physical form, but at the very essence of who he was. You speak truly, young one. In you, I sense a spirit that resonates with the deeper rhythms of life. But what could one human do against the economic forces that drive galactic civilization? Marcus didn't have an immediate answer, but as he stood there surrounded by the impossible beauty of Sylvana's presence, he felt something awakening within him, a sense of purpose he had never experienced before. His whole life, he had been seen as an oddity, a young man who preferred the company of animals and plants to the technological marvels that fascinated his peers. But perhaps that very difference was what was needed now. I don't know yet, he admitted, but I want to help. This forest, everything you've created here, it's too important to lose. For the first time since their encounter began, Sylvana's smile seemed genuinely hopeful. Perhaps there is indeed another path forward, but it would require you to become something more than you currently are, to bridge the gap between the natural world I represent and the technological civilization your species has embraced. Before Marcus could ask what she meant, the sound of breaking branches announced the arrival of the logging crew in the immediate vicinity. Through the trees, he could see the massive forms of automated harvesters moving methodically through the forest, their sensors identifying the most valuable specimens, while their cutting arms prepared to reduce centuries of growth to raw materials. They cannot see me as you do, Sylvana whispered urgently. My presence is veiled from their instruments and their perception. But you, Marcus Kellaway, you have a choice to make. Return to your village and pretend this encounter never happened, or remain and learn what it truly means to be a guardian of life itself. The lead harvester was now close enough that Marcus could see its operator through the transparent aluminum canopy, a bored-looking technician who saw the forest around him as nothing more than inventory to be processed. The machine scanner array swept across the clearing where Marcus stood, but somehow failed to register either him or his flock. It was as if Sylvana's influence created a bubble of invisibility around them. Marcus looked back at the forest goddess, seeing in her ancient eyes both infinite patience and desperate hope. He thought of his simple life in Millbrook, of the expectations his family had for his future, of the ordinary path that lay before him. Then he looked at the harvester, imagining this entire magical realm reduced to stumps and economic statistics. The choice, when it came, felt less like a decision than like recognizing something that had always been true. I'll stay, he said quietly. Whatever you need me to become, whatever it takes to protect this place, I'll do it. Sylvana's radiant smile was like sunrise after an endless night. Around them, the forest itself seemed to sigh with relief, and Marcus felt something fundamental shift in the very fabric of his being. He could sense new pathways opening in his mind, connections forming between his consciousness and the vast network of life that Sylvana embodied. Then, let us begin your true education, my young shepherd, she said, extending her hand toward him. For you are about to learn that humanity's greatest strength has never been its technology, but its capacity to form bonds that transcend the boundaries between different forms of life. As Marcus reached out to take her hand, he felt the last echoes of his former existence fading away. Whatever happened next, he knew there could be no going back to the simple life he had known. But as Sylvana's fingers intertwined with his, and power beyond imagination began to flow between them, he realized he had no desire to return to that smaller world anyway. The real adventure was just beginning. The moment Sylvana's fingers touched his, Marcus felt the universe explode into new dimensions of perception. What had once been simple forest sounds became a complex symphony of communication. Trees sharing nutrients through underground networks, fungi translating chemical signals between different plant species, and countless microorganisms working in perfect harmony to maintain the delicate balance of life. His consciousness expanded beyond his human frame, flowing through root systems and mycorrhizal connections until he could perceive the forest as Sylvana did, as a single, vast, living entity. "This is overwhelming," he gasped, his knees buckling as sensory information flooded his enhanced awareness. The experience was like trying to drink from a waterfall, and his human nervous system struggled to process the incredible complexity of what he was perceiving. "Peace, young guardian." Sylvana's voice resonated through both the air and the living network that now connected them. "You must learn to filter and focus these new senses, or they will drive you to madness. Observe how I maintain my consciousness while remaining connected to every leaf and root." With gentle guidance, she taught him to create mental barriers, partitioning his enhanced perception so that he could access the forest network without being overwhelmed by it. Gradually, Marcus learned to dial his awareness up or down, focusing on specific areas or species while keeping the broader network as a subtle background presence. The automated harvester had moved past their clearing, but its route would bring it back within the hour as it followed its programmed harvesting pattern. Marcus could now perceive the machine not just as a visual object, but as a dead zone in the living tapestry, a place where the natural flow of life energy was blocked and disrupted. "How long do we have before they reach the heart of the forest?" he asked, surprised to discover that he could communicate through the network itself, his thoughts traveling through the interconnected root systems faster than any spoken word. 3 days at their current pace," Sylvana replied, her mental voice carrying undertones of deep concern. "The ancient grove, where I was first awakened, lies at the forest's center. If they destroy it, my connection to this realm will be severed, and I will fade back into the cosmic background from which I came." Marcus felt a surge of protective anger that seemed to resonate through the entire forest. Birds took flight in agitated flocks, while small mammals scurried for cover as his emotional state rippled through the network. "There has to be something we can do, some way to convince them to stop. The corporation operates under galactic law," Sylvana explained patiently. "They have purchased legitimate harvesting rights through proper legal channels. Even if I were to reveal myself to the authorities, the bureaucracy involved in halting their operation would take months or years to resolve. By then, the damage would be irreversible." As they spoke, Marcus became aware of movement at the edge of his expanded perception. A small group of humans was making its way through the forest on foot, moving with the confident stride of people who belonged in the wilderness. Unlike the corporate technicians operating the harvesters, these individuals seemed to move in harmony with their surroundings, stepping carefully to avoid damaging delicate plants and pausing frequently to observe the wildlife around them. Researchers, Sylvana identified them, her mental voice carrying a note of cautious interest. Dr. Elena Vasquez and her xenobiology team from the University of New Geneva. They arrived on planet 3 days ago to conduct a biodiversity survey of the Valdris ecosystem. Marcus focused his enhanced senses on the approaching group, marveling at how clearly he could perceive them despite the distance. Dr. Vasquez appeared to be in her 40s, with the weathered features of someone who had spent considerable time in field research. Her team consisted of 4 graduate students and a senior researcher, all equipped with sophisticated scanning equipment that Marcus now realized was barely scratching the surface of the forest's true complexity. "They might be our answer," he said suddenly, an idea beginning to form in his mind. "If we could show them what this place really is, not just the surface biodiversity they're cataloging, but the deeper connections you've revealed to me, maybe they could find a way to legally protect it." "The academic world operates under its own constraints," Sylvana cautioned. "Dr. Vasquez is indeed a brilliant scientist with a genuine passion for conservation, but she would never believe evidence that contradicts everything her education has taught her about how ecosystems function. The level of integration and intelligence I have fostered here is theoretically impossible according to current xenobiological models." Marcus considered this challenge as he watched the research team through his network connection. They had stopped in a small meadow where Dr. Vasquez was pointing out various plant species to her students, explaining the supposedly random distribution patterns that Marcus could now see were actually part of Sylvana's carefully orchestrated design. What if we didn't tell her directly? He suggested. What if we just guided her research in the right direction? Let her discover the connections for herself. Sylvana's presence in the network grew more focused, and Marcus sensed her considering the possibilities. It would require extraordinary subtlety, she mused. We would need to present evidence that appears natural while gradually leading her toward conclusions that challenge her fundamental assumptions about ecosystem behavior. You've been manipulating this forest for centuries, Marcus pointed out. Surely you could arrange for her team to encounter phenomena that would make them question their existing models. A pulse of amusement rippled through the network. You think like a strategist, young guardian. Very well. Let us see if human scientific curiosity can be as powerful a force as human greed. But this will require your direct participation. I can arrange the evidence, but you will need to interact with Dr. Vasquez's team as a seemingly innocent local guide who just happens to lead them toward the most significant discoveries. Marcus felt a moment of uncertainty. His entire life had been spent avoiding the complex social interactions that came naturally to most people his age. The thought of deliberately deceiving a group of brilliant scientists was daunting, especially when the deception was meant to reveal a deeper truth. I don't know if I'm clever enough to fool university researchers, he admitted. You will not be fooling them, Sylvana assured him. Everything you show them will be completely genuine, merely presented in a context that encourages them to see patterns they might otherwise overlook. Your role is simply to be yourself, a young man who knows these woods better than anyone and who has noticed things that might interest visiting scientists. To demonstrate her point, Sylvana began making subtle adjustments throughout the immediate area. Bioluminescent fungi that normally only appeared during specific moon phases began to glow softly among the tree roots. Flowering vines that had been dormant shifted into rapid bloom, creating spectacular displays of color that would be impossible to ignore. Most remarkably, she orchestrated a symphony of bird calls that formed complex harmonic patterns, something that would immediately catch the attention of any trained xenobiologist. Dr. Vasquez specializes in interspecies communication, she explained as the melodic patterns grew more intricate. She has published several papers on the theoretical possibility of ecosystem-wide information networks. If we can provide her with evidence that such networks not only exist, but demonstrate remarkable sophistication, her scientific integrity will compel her to investigate further. The research team had indeed noticed the unusual bird song, and Marcus could see them hurrying toward the source of the phenomenon. Dr. Vasquez was practically running, her scanner array beeping frantically as it registered the unprecedented coordination among multiple avian species. They're heading straight for us, Marcus observed nervously. Then, it is time for you to become the local shepherd boy who stumbled across something interesting, Sylvana replied, her physical form beginning to shimmer and fade. Remember, you know nothing of my true nature, but your sensitivity to the forest's natural rhythms has allowed you to notice patterns that others might miss. As Sylvana's presence withdrew to a barely perceptible background whisper, Marcus felt suddenly alone and very young. The enhanced perception remained, but muted to manageable levels. His flock, which had stood motionless throughout his transformation, began moving and bleating normally again, as if awakening from shared dream. Dr. Vasquez burst into the clearing just as the bird's song reached its crescendo, her dark eyes wide with excitement as her scanners attempted to make sense of what they were recording. She was a compact woman with graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her clothes marked her as someone who prioritized function over fashion. Behind her, the graduate students struggled to keep up while managing their own equipment loads. Extraordinary, she breathed, seemingly unaware of Marcus's presence as she focused on the impossible harmonies echoing through the trees. The coordination patterns are off the charts. It's as if they're deliberately creating mathematical progressions. The birds do that sometimes, Marcus said quietly, causing the entire research team to spin toward him in surprise. Usually around dawn or sunset, but today they started earlier. Dr. Vasquez studied him with the intense gaze of someone accustomed to cataloging new phenomena. You're local to this area? How often have you observed this behavior? I bring my flock through here most days, Marcus replied, gesturing toward his sheep. The birds have their own patterns, but lately they've been different. More organized, I suppose you could say. Different how? Dr. Vasquez pressed, her scientific instincts clearly aroused. Can you be more specific about when you first noticed these changes? Marcus pretended to consider the question while actually accessing his network-enhanced memories to provide accurate details. Maybe 3 weeks ago, it started with just a few species, but now almost every bird in the forest seems to participate. And it's not just the calls, they coordinate their flying patterns too. To emphasize his point, Sylvana triggered a spectacular aerial display. Hundreds of birds rose from the canopy in perfect synchronization, forming complex three-dimensional patterns that shifted and flowed like liquid murals painted across the sky. The formation held for nearly a minute before dissolving back into apparently random individual flights. The graduate students stood slack-jawed while their equipment registered readings that violated several fundamental principles of animal behavior. Dr. Vasquez, however, was practically vibrating with excitement as she realized she might be witnessing a completely new form of collective intelligence. This is unprecedented, she said, her voice barely containing her enthusiasm. Young man, would you be willing to serve as our guide through these woods? What you've described could represent the most significant discovery in xenobiology in decades. I suppose I could, Marcus replied with carefully feigned uncertainty. But I should warn you, there are other strange things in these deep woods. Things that might not make sense to city folk. What kind of things? One of the graduate students asked nervously. Marcus glanced around the clearing, noting the subtle signs of Sylvana's influence that were visible to his enhanced perception. Plants that grow in patterns that seem almost deliberate. Water sources that appear overnight in places where there shouldn't be groundwater. Sometimes it feels like the whole forest is connected somehow, like it's all part of something bigger. Dr. Vasquez exchanged meaningful glances with her senior researcher. Connected how? Can you elaborate on that observation? It's hard to explain, Marcus said, which was absolutely true despite being misleading. You'd have to see it for yourself. But if you're really interested in studying the forest, I could show you places where the connection seems strongest. Places where the patterns are most obvious. We would be extremely interested, Dr. Vasquez confirmed immediately. Our initial survey was meant to last only a week, but based on what we've observed just now, I think we'll need to extend our research timeline significantly. As they spoke, the sound of the automated harvester grew audible again in the distance, a mechanical grinding that seemed to wound the very air. Dr. Vasquez frowned as she recognized the noise. The Galactic Timber Consortium, she said with obvious distaste. I tried to coordinate our research schedule with their operations, but they insisted their harvesting couldn't be delayed. We have to complete our biodiversity survey before they process too much of the ecosystem. Marcus felt a surge of hope mixed with urgency. If Dr. Vasquez could be guided toward understanding the forest's true nature, she might be able to provide the scientific evidence needed to halt the harvesting operation legally. How much time do we have? He asked. Based on their current processing rate, perhaps a week before they reach the most biodiverse areas, Dr. Vasquez replied grimly. Corporate interests always seem to take precedence over scientific research, no matter how potentially significant. Then, we should start immediately, Marcus said with conviction that surprised even himself. There are things in this forest that will change everything you think you know about how life works. But we need to move quickly if you're going to see them before the harvesters destroy the evidence. Dr. Vasquez studied his face intently, And Marcus had the uncomfortable feeling that her years of field research had given her an ability to read people almost as acute as his ability to read the forest network. "You really believe that, don't you?" she said finally. "You're not just trying to delay the harvesting operation for sentimental reasons. You genuinely think there's something here that the scientific community needs to see." "I know there is," Marcus replied with quiet certainty. The weight of that conviction seemed to resonate with something in Dr. Vasquez's own scientific passion. She nodded decisively and turned to address her team. "Change of plans, everyone. We're going to conduct an intensive deep forest survey with our young guide here. Pack for an extended expedition. I have a feeling we're about to rewrite several chapters of the xenobiology textbooks." As the research team began organizing their equipment for the deeper penetration into Valdor's forest, Marcus felt Sylvana's presence return as a warm whisper in the back of his mind. "Well done, young guardian." Her mental voice carried notes of approval and hope. "You have taken the first step on a path that may save not just this forest, but perhaps change how your species understands its relationship with the living universe itself." The automated harvester's grinding continued in the distance, a constant reminder of the race against time they were about to begin. But for the first time since this extraordinary day had begun, Marcus felt genuinely optimistic about their chances. Dr. Vasquez's scientific curiosity was proving to be every bit as powerful as Sylvana had suggested, and if they could reveal enough truth quickly enough, perhaps human ingenuity could find a way to protect what technology had threatened to destroy. The real challenge was just beginning. The expedition deeper into Valdor's forest began at dawn the following day. Dr. Vasquez had managed to contact the university administration overnight, securing emergency funding for an extended research mission after transmitting preliminary recordings of the coordinated bird behavior. The response from New Geneva had been immediate and enthusiastic. The xenobiology department was buzzing with excitement over what appeared to be the first documented case of cross-species collective intelligence in a natural ecosystem. Marcus led the team along paths that existed more in his enhanced awareness than in any physical reality, following routes that Sylvana had carefully optimized to showcase the forest's most remarkable phenomena while appearing to be the natural knowledge of a lifelong woodsman. His flock had been left in the care of his younger sister, freeing him to focus entirely on his role as guide and translator between two radically different forms of intelligence. "The fungal networks here are extraordinary," Dr. Vasquez commented as they paused beside a massive deadfall where bioluminescent mushrooms formed intricate spiral patterns along the decomposing trunk. "The geometric precision suggests some form of organizing principle that goes far beyond what we typically see in mycorrhizal associations." Through his connection to the forest network, Marcus could perceive exactly what she was observing. Sylvana had arranged for the fungi to demonstrate mathematical relationships that would intrigue any scientist while remaining technically within the bounds of natural possibility. The spiral patterns weren't just decorative. They represented information storage and transmission systems that allowed the forest to maintain detailed records of environmental changes across centuries. "My grandfather always said the mushrooms were like the forest's memory," Marcus offered carefully. "He claimed you could read the history of the woods and their patterns if you knew how to look." Dr. Vasquez's head snapped up with interest. "Did your grandfather keep any records of his observations? Notes or drawings that might help us understand how these patterns have changed over time?" "Some," Marcus replied truthfully. "But most of his knowledge was passed down through stories and direct observation. He spent 80 years walking these paths." "Would it be possible to interview him?" asked Dr. Sarah Chun, one of the graduate students who specialized in ethnobotany. Indigenous knowledge often contains insights that formal scientific methods overlook initially. Marcus felt a pang of genuine sadness. "He died last winter, but he taught me to see what he saw, at least partially." As they continued deeper into the forest, Sylvana orchestrated increasingly sophisticated displays of ecosystem integration. Trees seemed to communicate through synchronized changes in their leaf colors, creating wave patterns that rippled across the canopy for kilometers. Streams altered their courses slightly to water specific plant communities that would otherwise be stressed by the season's unusual dryness. Most remarkably, predator and prey species began exhibiting cooperative behaviors that contradicted fundamental principles of evolutionary competition. "This is impossible," muttered Dr. James Rodriguez, the team's senior researcher in ecosystem dynamics. "What we're observing violates basic assumptions about natural selection and resource competition. Predators don't coordinate their hunting patterns to ensure sustainable prey populations. They can't think that far ahead." "Maybe they don't have to think about it," Marcus suggested, drawing on insights he was receiving from Sylvana. "What if the forest itself provides the coordination? What if there's some kind of communication system we haven't recognized yet?" Dr. Vasquez was frantically taking notes while her scanner array worked to quantify the unprecedented phenomena they were witnessing. "The energy signatures are off the charts," she said, studying her readings with growing amazement. "There are information flows passing between organisms that shouldn't be possible given our current understanding of biochemical communication." Through the network, Marcus sensed Sylvana's careful modulation of her influence, revealing just enough to spark scientific curiosity while maintaining plausible deniability about the source of the coordination. It was a delicate balance that required her to suppress most of her true capabilities while still demonstrating enough integration to make the research team question their fundamental assumptions. The real test came when they reached the grove of ancient heartwood trees that formed one of the forest's primary neural nexuses. These massive specimens, some over 1,000 years old, served as major processing nodes in Sylvana's consciousness network. Their root systems extended for hundreds of meters underground, creating a biological computer of staggering complexity that coordinated ecosystem management across vast areas. "The electromagnetic readings here are unprecedented," Dr. Chen reported, her voice filled with scientific wonder. "It's as if these trees are generating some kind of bioelectric field that extends throughout the entire forest." Marcus could see what she couldn't: threads of living energy flowing between the massive trunks, carrying information and coordination signals that maintained the intricate balance Sylvana had spent centuries perfecting. To his enhanced perception, the grove resembled nothing so much as a vast brain, with thoughts flowing along root networks and consciousness distributed across an area that spanned dozens of square kilometers. "My grandfather called this the heart of the forest," he said quietly, the words carrying more truth than the researchers could possibly realize. He said if you listened carefully here, you could hear the woods thinking. Dr. Rodriguez was busy with his soil analysis equipment, his excitement growing by the minute. "The chemical complexity in these root zones is extraordinary. We're seeing molecular structures that shouldn't exist in nature, information storage compounds that resemble artificial neural networks more than anything biological." As if responding to their scientific scrutiny, the grove began to demonstrate its capabilities more overtly. The tree's electromagnetic fields synchronized into harmonic patterns that made the air itself seem to vibrate with purpose. Bioluminescent indicators appeared throughout the understory, creating a three-dimensional map of information flows that no human technology could replicate. "We need to contact the Galactic Science Council immediately," Dr. Vasquez said, her scientific training warring with the evidence before her eyes. "What we're documenting here represents a completely new form of biological organization. This could revolutionize our understanding of consciousness, communication, and ecosystem management." But even as she spoke, the sound of approaching machinery reminded them that time was running out. The automated harvesters were following their programmed schedule, steadily working their way toward the forest's most critical areas. In less than 48 hours, they would reach the grove where the team now stood, and no amount of scientific excitement would stop corporate equipment that was operating under legally binding contracts. Can the Science Council intervene quickly enough to halt the harvesting? Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Dr. Vasquez's expression grew grim. The bureaucratic process for declaring a scientific preserve can take months, even with emergency protocols. The consortium has invested too much money to halt operations based on preliminary findings that haven't been peer-reviewed yet. Then, we need to find another approach, Marcus said with determination that surprised the research team. There has to be some way to protect this place legally. Dr. Chun looked up from her analysis equipment with sudden inspiration. What if we could prove that the forest demonstrates genuine intelligence? Not just complex behavior, but actual consciousness and self-awareness? Galactic law provides immediate protection for any ecosystem that can be classified as a collective sentient entity. The legal threshold for proving ecosystem consciousness is extraordinarily high, Dr. Rodriguez warned. We would need to demonstrate not just complex behavior, but genuine self-awareness, intentional communication, and evidence of individual identity within the collective system. Marcus felt Sylvana's presence stir with interest at this possibility. Through their connection, he could sense her weighing the risks and benefits of revealing more of her true nature. The legal protection Dr. Chan described might indeed provide a path forward, but it would require Sylvana to expose herself to exactly the kind of scientific scrutiny she had spent centuries avoiding. What would constitute sufficient proof? He asked, his question carrying deeper implications than the researchers could understand. Direct communication would be ideal, Dr. Vasquez replied thoughtfully. If we could establish a genuine dialogue with the forest consciousness, assuming such a thing exists, that would meet any legal standard for sentience. As she spoke, something remarkable began to happen throughout the grove. The bioluminescent indicators that had been displaying seemingly random patterns suddenly organized themselves into geometric shapes that clearly represented mathematical concepts. Simple at first, basic arithmetic and geometric progressions, but rapidly advancing to complex equations that demonstrated understanding of advanced physics and chemistry. The research team stood transfixed as the forest around them essentially began solving scientific problems in real time, using living light to write equations in the air that would have challenged graduate students in theoretical physics. This is direct communication, Dr. Chun whispered in awe. It's demonstrating mathematical intelligence that equals or exceeds human capability. But Marcus could sense Sylvana's growing fatigue as she maintained such overt displays of her abilities. The kind of precise control required to create mathematical proofs using bioluminescent organisms was enormously taxing, even for a consciousness as vast as hers. She could maintain this level of demonstration for perhaps an hour before exhausting herself completely. We need to document everything, Dr. Vasquez said urgently, her scientific instincts overriding her amazement. Every equation, every pattern, every indication of intentional communication. If we're going to convince the Galactic Science Council that we're dealing with a sentient ecosystem, we need absolutely irrefutable evidence. The next hour passed in a blur of frantic documentation as Sylvana pushed herself to provide increasingly sophisticated proofs of her intelligence and self-awareness. She solved complex problems in xenobiology that had puzzled scientists for decades, demonstrated understanding of galactic history and culture that could only come from direct observation, and even engage in what amounted to philosophical discourse about the nature of consciousness and the relationship between individual and collective identity. But Marcus could feel the strain the demonstrations were placing on her. Each display of knowledge and intelligence required her to channel enormous amounts of energy through biological systems that weren't designed for such intense communication. Her presence in the network grew fainter as she exhausted her reserves, and Marcus realized with growing alarm that she was literally burning herself out to provide the proof the researchers needed. "That's enough," he said suddenly, stepping forward to interrupt Dr. Vasquez's excited questioning. "Can't you see this is exhausting? Whoever or whatever is communicating with us. Dr. Vasquez paused, her scientific enthusiasm momentarily checked by Marcus's evident concern. Around them, the bioluminescent displays were growing dimmer and less coordinated, like a conversation partner struggling to maintain focus despite overwhelming fatigue. "You're right," she said after a moment, her expression shifting from excitement to something approaching protectiveness. "If we're dealing with a genuine consciousness, we have ethical obligations that go beyond our research goals. We need to establish communication protocols that don't cause harm or distress." Through the fading network connection, Marcus sensed Sylvana's gratitude for his intervention. Her mental voice was barely a whisper now, strained nearly to the breaking point by her efforts to provide convincing proof of her existence. "The evidence we've gathered should be sufficient," Dr. Rodriguez said after reviewing their recordings. "No known natural process can account for the mathematical sophistication and contextual understanding we've documented. This clearly represents a form of intelligence that merits immediate legal protection. But will it be enough to stop the harvesters?" Marcus asked, looking around the grove that had become the center of his transformed existence. "And can we get legal intervention quickly enough to matter?" Dr. Vasquez was already composing urgent messages to both the Galactic Science Council and the University of New Geneva, transmitting the preliminary evidence along with requests for emergency preservation orders. But even as she worked, the sound of approaching machinery reminded them all that bureaucratic processes rarely moved fast enough to prevent irreversible damage. "We need a backup plan," Marcus said quietly, an idea beginning to form in his mind. "Something that doesn't depend on official intervention." As Sylvana's exhausted consciousness withdrew to recover from her demonstrations, Marcus found himself facing a choice that would define not just his own future, but potentially the relationship between humanity and the deeper forms of intelligence that shared their universe. The path forward would require him to become something unprecedented, a bridge between worlds that had never successfully communicated before. The real test of his commitment was about to begin. The automated harvesters reached the outer perimeter of the ancient grove just as the first emergency responses began arriving from the Galactic Science Council. Dr. Vasquez received word that her preliminary evidence had triggered immediate review protocols, but the bureaucratic machinery would still require at least 72 hours to process emergency protection orders. The consortium's equipment, operating under existing legal contracts, would reach the grove's heart in less than 18 hours. Marcus stood at the edge of the clearing where this extraordinary journey had begun, feeling Sylvana's presence slowly recovering in the depths of the forest network. Her demonstrations to the research team had drained her more severely than either of them had anticipated, leaving her consciousness fragmented and struggling to maintain coherence across her vast biological infrastructure. The grove's bioluminescent displays had faded to barely perceptible glimmers, and the coordinated ecosystem behaviors that had amazed the scientists were reduced to whispered echoes of their former complexity. "The legal petition is our best hope," Dr. Vasquez said, though her voice carried more doubt than confidence. "The evidence we've documented is unprecedented. Surely the Science Council will recognize the significance of what we've discovered." "And if they don't respond in time?" Marcus asked, already knowing the answer. Dr. Rodriguez looked up from his portable communication array, his expression grim. "I've been monitoring the consortium's operational frequencies. They've accelerated their harvesting schedule after detecting unauthorized personnel in their designated work area. They'll reach the primary grove site in 16 hours, not 18. Through his fading connection to the network, Marcus sensed something that made his blood run cold. The approaching harvesters weren't just following their original programming anymore. The consortium had detected the scientific team's presence and was interpreting their research as a potential threat to the harvesting operation's profitability. Corporate security protocols have been activated, prioritizing rapid extraction of the most valuable timber before any legal challenges could be mounted. "They're not just harvesting anymore," he said with growing alarm. "They're strip mining the forest as quickly as possible to prevent any interference." Dr. Chen's environmental monitoring equipment confirmed his fears. The processing rate has increased by 300%. At this pace, they'll clear-cut everything within a 5-kilometer radius of the grove by dawn tomorrow. Marcus felt desperation rising in his chest as he contemplated the destruction of everything Sylvana had spent millennia creating. The vast intelligence that had revealed itself to him was now vulnerable and nearly defenseless, weakened by her efforts to communicate with humanity through demonstrations that had pushed her consciousness beyond its limits. That was when the idea struck him, not as a carefully reasoned plan, but as a flash of insight that seemed to come from the forest network itself. If Sylvana was too weak to defend herself directly, and if legal protection would arrive too late, then perhaps the solution lay in making the forest intelligence undeniable to everyone involved, including the consortium operators themselves. "I need to get to the Harvester crews," he said suddenly. Not to the automated equipment, but to the human supervisors overseeing the operation. Dr. Vasquez looked at him with concern. That could be extremely dangerous. Corporate security has authorization to use force against anyone interfering with their operations. "I'm not going to interfere," Marcus replied, his mind racing as the plan crystallized. "I'm going to offer to guide them to the most valuable timber stands. But along the way, I'm going to make sure they experience what we've experienced." "You want to expose them to the forest consciousness?" Dr. Rodriguez asked incredulously. "What makes you think corporate executives will be any more receptive than scientists were initially?" Marcus smiled with grim determination. "Because I'm not going to reveal it gradually like we did with you. I'm going to hit them with everything at once. Show them exactly what they're about to destroy in terms they'll understand immediately." Through his weakened connection to Sylvana, he sensed her stirring with interest despite her exhaustion. The idea resonated with something in her ancient consciousness, a strategy that appealed to her understanding of human psychology in ways that purely logical arguments never could. "It's dangerous," her mental voice whispered, barely audible through the damaged network. "If you reveal too much too quickly, they might simply classify the forest as a hostile alien intelligence that needs to be contained rather than protected. Then, we'll have to be very careful about how we present the revelation," Marcus replied. "Not as something alien and threatening, but as something remarkably human in the most fundamental sense." Dr. Vasquez was studying him with the intense focus she usually reserved for analyzing particularly complex data sets. "You're planning something specific, aren't you? Something beyond simple demonstration. I'm going to show them that the forest consciousness isn't separate from human consciousness at all," Marcus said, his voice carrying conviction that surprised even himself. "I'm going to demonstrate that what Sylvana has created here represents the next stage of human evolution, a partnership between biological intelligence and technological capability that could revolutionize how our species interacts with living worlds." The research team exchanged uncertain glances. What Marcus was proposing went far beyond scientific documentation into territory that bordered on philosophical revolution. "The consortium executives are business people," Dr. Chun pointed out practically. "They're motivated by profit, not by abstract concepts about consciousness evolution." "Exactly," Marcus replied with growing excitement, "which is why I'm going to show them the economic potential of what they're about to destroy. A fully integrated ecosystem consciousness could manage planetary resources with efficiency that no artificial intelligence could match. Instead of strip mining worlds for short-term profit, we could develop sustainable partnerships that generate wealth for centuries." Through the forest network, he felt Sylvana's surprise at this perspective. In all her millennia of existence, she had never considered the possibility that human economic motivations might actually align with ecological preservation if the scale and scope were properly understood. "You would turn conservation into a business model," she observed with something that might have been amusement. "I would turn it into the only business model that makes sense for a species that wants to survive long-term," Marcus corrected. "Humans are incredibly adaptable when they understand the true scope of opportunities available to them. The plan that emerged over the next hour was audacious in its simplicity. Marcus would approach the consortium's local operations director under the guise of offering specialized knowledge about the forest's most valuable resources. Once he had access to the decision-makers, he would guide them to the grove where Sylvana could demonstrate her capabilities, not as an alien intelligence to be studied, but as a business partner offering unprecedented opportunities for sustainable resource management. The risk is enormous, Dr. Vasquez warned as Marcus prepared to leave the research camp. If they interpret the forest consciousness as a threat to human interests, they might call in corporate military units to contain or destroy it. Then, I'll have to make sure they see it as the greatest business opportunity in galactic history instead. Marcus replied with confidence he didn't entirely feel. The trek to the consortium's mobile headquarters took Marcus through sections of forest that showed the devastating effects of accelerated harvesting. Centuries-old trees had been reduced to processed timber in a matter of hours, their root systems torn from soil that would take decades to recover from the disruption. The sight strengthened his resolve, while simultaneously filling him with grief for the irreplaceable losses that had already occurred. The consortium's command center was an impressive display of corporate efficiency, a cluster of modular buildings and equipment pods that had converted a forest clearing into a high-tech industrial facility within a matter of days. Marcus approached the security perimeter with careful attention to appearing non-threatening, his shepherd's clothing and apparent youth helping to present him as exactly what he claimed to be, a local resident with useful knowledge to share. "I'd like to speak with whoever's in charge of identifying premium timber resources," he told the security guard, a bored-looking private contractor who seemed more interested in his entertainment screen than in potential security threats. "You got information about valuable stands?" the guard asked with sudden interest. The consortium offered substantial bounties for intelligence that led to the discovery of rare or particularly high-quality timber. "I know where the ancient heartwood groves are located," Marcus replied truthfully. "The trees that are worth more than everything else combined." Within minutes, he found himself facing director Elena Morrison, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who had built her career on maximizing resource extraction efficiency across dozens of worlds. Her office was a mobile command center filled with holographic displays showing real-time harvesting progress and profit projections. "You claim to know the location of heartwood stands that our surveys missed?" she asked directly, clearly a woman who valued time above pleasantries. "Your surveys are looking for individual high-value trees," Marcus replied carefully. "I'm talking about something much more significant, a grove where the heartwood trees have grown together into a single integrated system. The timber value would be extraordinary, but the real potential goes far beyond simple harvesting." Director Morrison's attention focused with laser intensity. "Explain." This was the crucial moment, the point where Marcus had to begin revealing truths that would sound impossible to conventional thinking while framing them in terms that appealed to corporate instincts. "The forest here isn't just a collection of individual trees," he said, drawing on everything Sylvana had taught him about the network's true nature. "There's an underlying organizational structure that manages resource distribution, pest control, and environmental adaptation with efficiency that surpasses anything our technology can achieve. Instead of harvesting the trees, imagine harvesting that organizational capability itself." Director Morrison leaned back in her chair, studying Marcus with the calculating gaze of someone accustomed to evaluating unconventional proposals. "You're suggesting some kind of biological management system?" "I'm suggesting a partnership," Marcus replied boldly. "The forest consciousness, and yes, I mean genuine consciousness, could manage an entire planet's resources sustainably while generating continuous profits for centuries instead of the short-term gains from clear-cutting." The director's expression shifted from skepticism to sharp interest. "You're claiming this forest demonstrates actual intelligence." "I'm claiming it demonstrates intelligence that makes our best artificial systems look primitive by comparison," Marcus said with complete honesty. "But you'll need to see it for yourself to understand the full implications." An hour later, Marcus was leading a small convoy of corporate vehicles toward the ancient grove, his heart pounding as he realized that everything, Sylvana's existence, the forest's survival, and perhaps the future relationship between humanity and biological consciousness, depended on what happened in the next few hours. Through his connection to the weakened but recovering network, he felt Sylvana preparing for the most important performance of her eternal existence. She would have only one chance to convince corporate humanity that partnership offered greater rewards than exploitation. As they approached the grove, Marcus could sense the forest consciousness gathering its remaining strength for a demonstration that would either save or doom everything she had spent millennia creating. The ancient trees began to glow with soft bioluminescence, and the air itself seemed to thicken with anticipation. Director Morrison stepped out of her vehicle and immediately noticed the electromagnetic readings on her instruments. "What am I looking at here?" she asked, her voice carrying a mixture of amazement and calculation. "The future," Marcus replied simply. "The question is whether humanity is ready to embrace it. What happened next would determine whether the galaxy's most powerful species would learn to partner with intelligences beyond their current understanding, or whether fear and greed would drive them to destroy possibilities they couldn't yet comprehend." Marcus stood at the center of it all, a simple shepherd boy who had become the bridge between worlds that had never successfully communicated before. The forest held its breath, waiting for humanity's answer.